Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Yeah, heck yeah. I'm Nicholas O'Brien. I'll be hosting today's session with Maxwell. I'm not going to say too much, but I will introduce. I called you Maxwell, but would you prefer Max?
Either works.
Okay, cool. And today's session is called The Magazine Model Lessons from the HTML Review, which Max is the editor of and founder of and organizer of and everything of. And I'll be also facilitating the discussion on Discord. So if there's any questions in Discord, I'll be bringing them in during the Q&A session. And we're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. So without further ado, Max, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Max. I'm a writer, but ever since I published my first book 11 years ago, I've been lucky enough to work in games, theater, dance, weird technology art, you name it. I've been really lucky to work in a lot of different fields, including niche editing and publishing. The first part of the talk I'm actually going to do in the browser, kind of show what this crazy thing, the HTML review is, and then I'll transition to slides. This is the most recent issue of the HTML review. The HTML review we call a literary magazine, even though it's a website. And we say we publish literature that uses the web as medium in sort of one way or another. So that can mean fiction, nonfiction, essays, poetry, graphical storytelling. It can mean all sorts of different things. And we actually completely redesign the site each year for each issue. We publish the first spring every year, and Shelby Wilson, my collaborator who does everything on the site with me, we both do it together. We're the only two people. Shelby designs an issue from scratch every single time, and I have no idea what it's going to be, but Shelby is an incredible genius. This was our third issue, which was based on this seating scheme, not seating scheme, this authoring scheme for academic papers that was trying to be like the seating scheme of King Arthur's Round Table. So there was no first author. And Shelby adapted this to be the table of contents for a literary magazine. This is our second issue, which had like everything in these weird little structural boxes, which is actually an incredible set of CSS tricks. And each one had part of the piece within its little icon. And then this was our first issue where each piece in the table of contents had these amazing portals, windows and doors and cabinets. To show you real quick some examples of what we publish now dozens of things, including something of Nick's. And we actually have 5 contributors have been presenting at NarraScope in different capacities, which I didn't even know was happening. But these are just examples. This is Force Void by Hannah Jenkins, which is a set of poetic stanzas that is based on Minesweeper, where when you trigger the emoji versions, they sort of unveil. And then eventually we won't have time, they'll get sort of like obscured. The poem will recede sort of as much as it appears. It's started to happen right there. This is this amazing piece from our most recent issue by Blair Johnson and Luke Williams called Spolia, which is this architectural phenomenon particularly in Italy, where Roman ruins, people pulled parts off of buildings where inscriptions were. So you'd have these like obscured language bits from where people took that away. And this entire piece of writing, you have to move stones in order to read it and advance. It's incredible. This is Paramecium Diner, which you can see it's already running. The instructions are getting erased, but it's a work by Murakana where you can basically type in words. I don't know why I decided to do Fred, but I did. And these amoeba will start to eat them. And eventually it creates an entire ecosystem based on the words you inputted. And if you don't do anything like it did, it actually erases the instructions, which is pretty funny. This is this work by this amazing writer, Eileen On, which is a ASCII memoir of every bedroom she's ever lived in, where she sort of created these and then wrote an essay about each one. These pieces of ASCII art. This is Discrepancies by Matthew Baker, which is a piece of short fiction, but one where phrases and sentences and words are constantly shifting between different versions of the story. And it's, in addition to being like a very serious work of literary fiction, of literary short fiction, it's actually like graphically kind of incredible when you stare at it for long enough, how much work Matthew put into this. This is Mono Drift by Hamid Yüksel, which is this kind of insane, massive, thousands and thousands of words interactive fiction piece in these sort of fake browser windows where you uncover what happened to this crew by sort of browsing through this entire sort of past and world. And then we've also released games or published versions of games. Here's that have ended up like having a real life as games, where we published an initial demo or sort of a browser version. Like here is Nicholas O'Brien's Bundle of Joys Steam page, but in a previous issue, we had a very sort of earlier slice of this, even though we're sort of a literary magazine. So those are just some examples of the HTML review. And I'm going to talk about why, with that weird collection of stuff, weird web art and web literature, we call ourselves a magazine. And hopefully encourage you all to maybe think about that as like a different way of releasing work. I think magazines are great. All magazines, all different kinds of magazines. They're just there's almost like nothing better to me in a lot of ways. But I think magazines are particularly good at distributing art and literature that might have a hard time as a single product, sort of in a capitalist marketplace. And the reasons they're really good at that are kind of what we've discovered at the HTML review, that by bundling works together, because we don't live in a world where microtransactions are this sort of viable thing, you can reliably find readers and an audience for things that otherwise would be really, really, really hard to get out there. And this is always true. I mean, here's 3 literary magazines. This is N+1, over there's The Drift, there's the Paris Review, and they all do the same thing, which is they all put on the same table of contents in the same issue first-time writers with some of the most famous writers in the world. And those share the same issue and share the same masthead. And we make sure to do the same thing every issue. We have people who have never published or made anything before, alongside people who have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers. And magazines sort of do this trick where they allow you to put those on the same footing, which you can't really do, like on Steam or on an itch page. It's very hard to do that in the same way, even in like a bundle, sort of put people on equal footing. And this has been happening a long time. Magazines are much older than sort of we realize. And what's interesting is when you look at magazines from multiple hundreds of years ago, they do the same thing, where they're like, yeah, here's Ezra Pound, here's a bunch of people I've never heard of. And you can go back and sort of see this. You can see these very, very, very famous names next to people who are publishing for the very first time. And what's interesting is in the history of magazines, from the beginning, they were publishing, you can find magazines that are all music, or magazines that are all games even, that are from even the 17th century, that these exist, where these things were released. And they were released serialized. They were released, even if it was only once a year, it got into this rhythm of, oh, here's this collection of things. And that's been true for a very long time. And this way in which magazines have always been multimedia and these different things, it's no surprise that, you know, in the first 20 non-academic websites were like Wired and The Economist. Magazines were some of the first people to go onto the web and go into a digital form, which is like kind of an interesting, it makes us feel better about the fact that like we're just a website, ultimately. And I'm not here to say starting magazine is gonna like make you rich. That era was like a brief moment. But that's another thing about the history of magazines that's really interesting, is that magazines as business really is this like very small window in the 20th century. And for most of its history, that's not the case. And what I would call there are these other viable business models for magazines that they're really good at that are totally unrelated to it as a fully functioning business. These are two examples. On the left is SSENSE, this magazine that existed for 15 years that this single person, Todd Lippy, put out, that collected some of the greatest and most famous visual artists of the 20th and 21st century. And it was just a guy in SSENSE, New York, putting out these issues, and used that to start a nonprofit, and was able to sort of attract donors and run it for basically as long as he could. And it, even though, you know, the magazine did eventually sort of stop, the way it gets remembered is different than other forms. Like the way SSENSE lives in libraries and archives is very different than like what happens when a game company folds. Magazines sort of allow this ability, even when they're small, self-run, nonprofit things, to be sort of, people take them very seriously. On the right is Frank Ocean's Blonde zine, which is like a 14-inch, very high quality magazine that he released with that album. He gave it away for free from magazine shops. He spent supposedly $950,000 of his own money on it, did not sell it, just sort of put it out in the world as an art project. And that self-funded model, that's obviously the extreme example, but that's what we do at the HTML Review. We pay our contributors, and that is just me calculating how much money I can spend of the money I've made out of the year and just like get away with it. And even though we pay pretty well, we pay $500 per contribution. We have friends who do this with, and they, you know, will publish poetry and pay a poet like $50, and they do that once a year in their literary magazine, and that's sort of fine. There are ways to do this with like just putting aside like a small part of your income and being like, hey, this is fun. I want to do it. And what's interesting is that's the same model as like what Frank Ocean did, where Frank wanted a magazine and was willing to spend $1 million to have a magazine. This is another example. This I love, Lapham's Quarterly, which was created by Lewis Lapham, who was a very famous Harper's editor. And this magazine published these themed issues on these sort of topics, like war, peace, money. But every piece of writing was not commissioned. It was all stuff from the archives. So Lewis would have an issue and it would have like, you know, like Joan Baez next to Julius Caesar in the same magazine, just as like his weird like passion project about how the world worked. And it's another really interesting example of like the afterlives of these institutions, because Lewis Lapham died, and then it wasn't clear what was going to happen, and it sort of entered this period of like, oh no, they stopped publishing. And then only a few weeks ago, Bard took Lapham's and was like, oh, we're going to restart the magazine. And that's a very common thing in magazines, where like magazines can die and then have these incredible rebirths that are unexpected and weird. And it's something very particular to magazines, that they're able to sort of have this almost undead quality to be resurrected. And what's also interesting about Lapham's is like, it gets to this thing which is kind of funny, which is like, I often get asked what the difference between a zine and a magazine is. And oh, it it's really just like a self-identity thing and an aesthetic thing. Because really what Lapham was doing was like very zine. It was very much like, I'm going to spend all my money on like a much fancier version of me photocopying all these things people did and assembling them. And it was distributed in ways that certain zine ethos people might recognize, even though it was like this very stodgy literary enterprise. So that distinction, I think, is really just like maybe less of an important one, I guess I would say. The real difference, I think, is that magazines, and we at the HTML Review do this, really are based on the idea of like, we're going to publish again. And you try to get in a rhythm. Magazines are about rhythm. So we publish the first day of spring every year, just once a year. And we have no social media. We have no newsletter. We've decided to just be a website intentionally. And there's a few reasons we do that. I can talk about it if people want, but what's amazing is that by calling ourselves a magazine and being in that rhythm, people just know. People learn and they know. And by assembling contributors, you're assembling all of their networks too. So you kind of don't need to necessarily like do the work you'd need to do in sort of other ways. The other thing about magazines is putting yourself in the role of an editor and a curator, I think, is something that's like really important for any type of creator to do if you're able to do it. I think that it's really easy, especially now, to get trapped and focused in a sort of individualistic, zero-sum version of the creative marketplace where you're just on your own, releasing your own work. Whereas putting yourself in the position of assembling the work of others and doing your very, very best to make those as good as they can possibly be is really not only rewarding, but can actually, frankly, like help your own career more than just being off in the corner on your own. It's a really interesting way of creating almost a better sense for where you as a creator sort of like live in the world by getting your hands actually dirty with sort of helping sort of other people's work, but also you really get a sense of what's worth doing and not. It kind of, I think, like changes your, or at least for me, it definitely changed my instinct to release stuff that's bad, is what I would say. It sort of took the pressure off in a different direction. The other thing that's really weird and interesting is you call yourself a magazine, and it's astonishing how seriously people take you. They just instantly think you're for real. And I mean like the Library of Congress, the Metropolitan Museum, MoMA, like it's crazy. And case in point, two of the works I showed at the top, one ended up in the De Young Museum, and Hannah's piece ended up in the Best of Australian Poems. And it's so weird that like this was the thing Shelby and I just started. The HTML Review started when, to the best of Shelby's memory, I texted her being like, I bought a domain. And yet suddenly you do it for a few years, and people in these sort of external places who you think would be very hard to pierce are just like, sure. And that's a really weird magic trick that we've learned. The other thing is, like, this is a list. This was off the top of my head. This is just people who've played with magazines in this way as part of their practice. And it's pretty much a list of like the coolest people in the last 150 years unintentionally. It's actually an astonishing thing to think about that you know, Merce Cunningham and I mean Alan Rickman studied graphic design and you know, was making his weird like music magazine with his friends before he became an actor. Like this is a very common part of some like very cool creative people. And so I think we should all join them by starting magazines. The last thing I'll say real quick is magazines are not newsletters. And the distinction that I think is really important, again, because of that individualistic tendency of I don't want to end up in a world where everyone just has like their little Substack and their little newsletter and everyone's competing against each other. What's wonderful about magazines is you're inherently undermining that by putting people together. And I genuinely think that's a much better way of packaging and releasing and discovering new work, especially work that would have a hard time finding an audience on its own. So that's what I came here to blab about. You can contact me at any of these places, but also I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. So we have some folks still typing in questions in the chat, so we can start with the room and Max, you can facilitate.
As someone who's worked on a few niche publications and mostly ended up publishing like 80% of it being my friends or people I knew.
Yeah.
Especially for something like this where it feels like a real hybrid form, like not quite games, maybe not quite literature, and the way people see it. How do you source contributors for it? How do you find people to work on it?
The question for Discord is how we source contributors. We have both. We have an open submissions window, which we just list on our website once a year. We have a month where like we'll take your email, basically. And we also reach out to people, even people we don't know. We just email them and like give it a shot. And then yeah, like we publish our friends. It's kind of all three, I guess I would say. But there's very different ways of doing it. But like submission windows work. I mean, they really. I will say that like they will source people you would never have guessed. Yeah.
Someone who's put the October November window in his calendar already. What volume of submissions do you usually get?
Great question. The question was what volume of submissions we get. It depends on the year and how much we 1 year we did a lot of outreach and that was a mistake because we ended up with like 4 issues worth of material and 3, you know, so there was a bunch of people we just couldn't publish. We had to say, hey, we love this, but we can't do it. So now we typically get, that year was 300. We typically get, I would say like between 120 and 150, but it kind of depends. It really depends, and we're working on that. But it's really a function of how much you blast the call.
Just there.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep. Is there a variety? Is it mostly story based, or is there a variety of different genres that?
It's really wide. It's a wide variety, and also we take both pitches and like we take like prototypes. Though we've been moving more in the direction of we've found it's better when we work with an idea from an earlier stage. So as in our earlier years, we took more finished work, but I think we're moving more in the direction of taking pitches. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say it's a phenomenal presentation and I very much enjoyed the love of the magazines. And what I love the most is there was in the beginning of the 20th century, especially game magazines had demo discs, also the additional digital edition to each magazine that's sort of gone away and hasn't been available. So I was wondering about how this ability to give a space to design and create this digital edition and then working from the beginning of an idea, sort of how the process of developing the digital sort of prototype interactive component.
Yeah, the question was like how do we approach this sort of digital issue component? Yeah. I mean, the answer is really just like Shelby is an incredible designer. It's something where like I think we approach it. The way we approach it actually is like we really think about like the web is a great medium and we should use it. and we try to like leverage it and its playfulness and its the fact that it can be shared and ripped off and retooled. Like that's definitely our design philosophy in terms of like digital production, I would say.
Thanks for the fantastic presentation. What do you look for in a pitch, especially from a newcomer without an existing body of work?
Great question. The question was what we look for in a pitch, especially from a newcomer. It's funny, I think we look for the number one thing that can be an issue with our submissions is we really like to publish stuff that, yes, uses the web as medium, but is not about the web. You know, we really look for things that are like, and we have published things that are about technology and are about the web, but we try not to be too far in that direction because it can just sort of like put you in a little bit of corner where you're repeating yourself. So we really love it when something uses that medium and then is about something else, but also like we really like try to get a sense of the person, I would say, more than their work. I think that's kind of like our philosophy in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
Former contributor. Yeah.
I'm really interested in what you're saying about kind of building a network around the magazine and taking it seriously, and also especially not using social media. I use social media, and I think it's cool when other people don't use social media. I've been working on quite a different project that it will involve publishing kind of media artworks, but publishing things by people who are not in the art world and not in, you know, the networks that, or the game world, networks that many of us are in. And I think like it's when you do a magazine like yours, there's like a organic formation of a network because everyone's like, you know, very eager to be part of that network, right? So they put work into contributing and growing that work. I just, maybe it's a little bit of a left field question. I just wonder if you had any thoughts about like publishing things by people who aren't aware of those networks or don't desire to, you know, it's not part of their life.
Yeah, it's a great
You wanna
question.
support their expression.
The question was about what you do when you're publishing a cohort of people who don't have like existing networks within a creative scene. And I actually think that and I've seen this actually play out in real time, particularly in the literary world, where like, yeah, but like everyone has friends and family, and you'd be blown away how much that can aggregate when you're putting like 10 or 15 people together. And I've actually really seen this play out. I mean, I know a writer who published a piece and was in an issue with another writer whose uncle loved that other person's piece so much. And 10 years later, that's how their novel got made into a movie. Like, so I think it's just kind of like everyone has people, you know, or thrilled parents or whatever. And like, that's something you can kind of play with.
Yeah, last question.
Oh, sure. All right. So normally, thank you, Max. That was wonderful. Coming from the magazine world as well, I really appreciate the love and everything you talked about for magazines. So normally for a magazine, part of it is like, you take like first serial rights, or, you know, you're sort of like the idea is like you're presenting work for the first time before it's anthologized, before it's in someone's book, right? So for work like this, you know, I was at the IFCOM talk yesterday, and everything was like, you can't, you know, if you're submitting a game, it can't have appeared anywhere, it can't be up on your you know, Ishiko site, it can't be anywhere. So what do you do for that? Do you ever like what are your rules? Like, can somebody, you know, could something have been posted on their own site and then you guys run it, or does it have to be appearing for the first time? And then what happens when the issue goes down, the new issue?
Yeah, great question. The question was about how we approach rights and first publication. We, at least up to now, have actually like done the opposite, where we have been willing to publish previous published things. So like we try not to, I would say. But the one thing we do, and this is really about, again, like the web as medium, is we don't take any rights. Because the way web browsers actually work is, you know, technically speaking, a violation of contemporary interpretation of intellectual property law. So I mean, it's we just feel kind of absurd doing that because it's like, well, what are we talking about? You know, but that again, I think is even different than like a game distributed through another means, I think. But I mean, it's because, you know, a website, like the whole point is that you can like open developer tools and just like steal someone's entire code. So we actually say on our website, like, yeah, creators own everything. Like we view ourselves more as just like an encourager, an incubator, and make cool stuff because we just don't think it's possible with the web.
Cool. That's gonna
Awesome.
bring us right to time. Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much. Max.
much.
Thank you.